Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Today we are going to do the poem All But Blind by Walter de la Mare. Let me first introduce you to the poet Walter de la Mare. He was born on 25th April 1873 and died on 22nd June 1956. He was an English poet, short story writer, and novelist. He is probably best remembered for his works for children, for his poem The Listeners, and for a highly acclaimed selection of subtle psychological horror stories. Let me first read the poem to you. All but blind. All but blind in his chambered hole gropes for worms the four-clawed mole. All but blind in the evening sky the hooded bat twirls softly by. All but blind in the burning day the barn owl blunders on her way. And blind as are these three to me, so blind to someone I must be. If you notice here, I have highlighted different things here in this poem throughout the stanzas using different font colors. These will be explained later on when we'll be doing the explanation of the stanzas and when I will be discussing the structure and the use of literary devices in the poem. Let's look at the structure of the poem. The poem has got a simple structure but has a very deep meaning. The title of the poem is ironic, apparently talking about the blindness of animals but implying the blindness of human beings. The poem has four stanzas with the rhyme scheme A, B, C, B throughout all three stanzas. 4-line stanzas are called quatrains. The narrator is the poet himself. So if you have noticed, while the poem was introduced to you, I have given you the rhyme scheme of the poem, and when you go back to the text of the poem, in the last slide, you will see that the rhyme scheme has been explained to you in the poem. I'll again go back to the slide and explain to you how this rhyme scheme works. If you notice here throughout the stanzas, in the first stanza, hole and mole are rhyming with each other. So we are using the letter B with both of them because they are rhyming with each other. Whereas the first line is A and the third line is C. So the second and the fourth line are rhyming. In this second stanza, it's again the same, that sky and by, that is the second and the fourth line are rhyming. And the third stanza, day and way are rhyming with each other. And in the fourth stanza, me and be are rhyming with each other. So you see that the entire poem has the same rhyme scheme, that is A, B, C, B. Now the use of figurative language. In the first stanza, we see that the poet has used metaphor. Chambered hole, that's a metaphor, and the hole of the mole, that is where the mole lives, it is being metaphorically compared to a chamber. It also means people with a limited vision. Then personification has been used where he is using the word hooded bat. Here the bat has been personified wearing a hood. It also means people who are secretive, not open to share their opinions. In other words, they are introvert people. Then there are a lot of examples of imagery, and I've given you many examples here. Gropes for worms, the four-clawed mole, in the evening sky, the hooded bat twirls softly by, then the burning day, and the barn owl. These are all examples of imagery. All these images, they spring before your eyes when you read them in the text. Then there's the use of simile, and blind as are these three to me. Here, the poet is comparing his blindness to the blindness of all three, that is, mole, bat, and owl. Then, the poetic devices that are used in the poem, they are alliteration, assonance, and repetition. We see alliteration where it means the repetition of consonant sounds, and in the first line, that is all but blind, here b consonant sound is being repeated. Then we see assonance there in the poem. It's a repetition of vowel sounds o, for example, whole, grope, mole, and four. And repetition of e vowel sound in this line, these three to me. So here you see assonance. Then there is repetition, all but blind. This line is being repeated in the poem. So these all, alliteration, assonance, and repetition, they create a musical effect, or you can say the rhythm in the poem. Now I will explain to you the stanzas. So the first stanza, the poem begins with the title All But Blind. The poet is giving examples of the blind, and he picks an example from the animal world, that is a mole. A mole lives in its chambered hole and is able to find worms for itself. For human beings, it is blind, but within its limited space, it is able to sustain itself. The hole of the mole is being compared metaphorically to a chamber. It is also a symbol for those people who have limited vision, yet they are able to live their lives in their own way. So they might appear blind to others, but they are, with that shortcoming, with that one shortcoming of being blind, they are able to live their lives. Then we move on to the stanza 2. In the second stanza, the poet again repeats the same line as in the first stanza, that all but only blind are unable to see. He gives us an example of a bat which is deprived of sight in daylight. Here he personifies the bat by showing it hooded. The bat is able to find its way in the evening light. The hooded bat is a symbol of those people who are introvert. Such people are also able to sustain in life like a bat, with a limited vision and limited approach towards life. In the third stanza, the poet gives us another example of blind, that is an owl. It is a nocturnal bird and cannot see in the daylight. It also blunders its way in daylight to the barn. This owl is a symbol for those people who are unable to perceive truth and keep on blundering and making errors in their lives. Burning day is a symbol for truth. Even such people who make errors, who are unable to see the truth, they are also able to live in this life. So all these three living creatures, that is the mole, the bat, and the owl, physically they might appear blind to us, but they can also, with their shortcoming, live in this world. So, coming back to the title of the poem, where the poet says all but blind. So, by focusing on but blind, he has given us the example of these three living creatures by showing them physically blind, but even with this deprivation, with this shortcoming, they are able to sustain in their lives within their own circle. In the final, that is the fourth stanza, the poet sums up very beautifully what he wants to say. He says that as these three animals from the natural world appear blind to him, he might appear blind to others. In other words, he concludes the poem with a very poignant message. All human beings have been granted a limited vision. The entire vision has not been given to mortals. Therefore, physical blindness does not necessarily mean complete blindness. Each one of us is blind in one way or other. The title of the poem, All But Blind, is ironic as it tries to focus in the first three stanzas on the blind. hinting that though physically blind, these creatures can live in their own way with their limitations. Finally, in the fourth stanza, the poet establishes the fact that all are blind. They might not be physically blind, but can be blind spiritually and intellectually. Now we move on to the themes of the poem. So, the poet here, he is focusing on the theme of appearance versus reality. That is, what might appear to you might not be reality. That the people who might appear to you physically blind, necessarily not such kind of people are blind. They might be strong in some other way, they might have some other strengths in them, they might be spiritually and intellectually more enlightened than the people who are physically not blind and who can see. So, what appears to you physically might not be the reality. So, the difference between appearance and reality is one of the major themes of this poem. And he has given the example of these living creatures, and these living creatures are in fact symbolic of people all around us who have shortcomings, who have weaknesses, but this does not mean that they are not able to live. With their weaknesses, with their shortcomings, they are able to live their lives successfully. Then he talks about man's inability to understand the natural world or truth. Now, by giving examples of all these and then finally coming to the fourth stanza when he says that all are blind, what actually the poet is trying to tell us here is that we all are imperfect. So, human beings cannot be perfect. No one is perfect. It's only God who is perfect. And this inability of human beings to understand the truth, the universal truth, or the real truth, is what makes human beings imperfect. They are unable to grasp the entire truth, and that is what makes them imperfect. So we are all, in one way or another, we are all imperfect and we are unable to understand the reality, the truth which is hidden from our physical eye. Then, blindness is overall the major theme of this poem, and again, reinforcing what I have already said, that we are all blind. And this is the main theme of this poem, which he sums up in the fourth stanza very beautifully and very effectively. That if we might be considering others as blind, we might also appear blind to those others. So we are all blind in one way or another. So I hope that this poem is clear to you. Thank you so much.